The Critic as Artist, Dialogue Number 2 by Oscar Wilde. This is part 2 of 2 parts. Ernest. The critic, then, being limited to the subjective form, will necessarily be less able to fully express himself than the artist, who has always at his disposal the forms that are impersonal and objective. Gilbert. Not necessarily, and certainly not at all if he recognizes that each mode of criticism is, in its highest development, simply a mood, and that we are never more true to ourselves than when we are inconsistent. The aesthetic critic, constant only to the principle of beauty in all things, will ever be looking for fresh impressions, winning from the various schools the secret of their charm, bowing, it may be, before foreign altars, or smiling, if it be his fancy, at strange new gods. What other people call one's past has no doubt everything to do with them, but has absolutely nothing to do with oneself. The man who regards his past is a man who deserves to have no future to look forward to. When one has found expression for a mood, one has done with it. You laugh, but believe me, it is so. Yesterday it was realism that charmed one. One gained from it that nouveau frisson which it was its aim to produce. One analyzed it, explained it, and wearied of it. At sunset came the luminist in painting, and the symbolist in poetry, and the spirit of medievalism, that spirit which belongs to no time but to temperament, woke suddenly in wounded Russia, and stirred us for a moment by the terrible fascination of pain. Today the cry is for romance, and already the leaves are tremulous in the valley, and on the purple hilltops walks beauty with slim gilded feet. The old modes of creation linger, of course. The artists reproduce either themselves or each other with wearisome iteration. But criticism is always moving on, and the critic is always developing. Nor again is the critic really limited to the subjective form of expression. The method of the drama is his, as well as the method of the epos. He may use dialogue, as he did who set Milton talking to Marvell on the nature of comedy and tragedy, and made Sidney and Lord Brooke discourse on letters beneath the Penshurst oaks, or adopt narration, as Mr. Pater is fond of doing, each of whose imaginary portraits is not that the title of the book presents to us, under the fanciful guise of fiction, some fine and exquisite piece of criticism, one on the painter Watteau, another on the philosophy of Spinoza, a third on the pagan elements of the early Renaissance, and the last, and in some respects the most suggestive, on the source of that Aufklärung, that enlightening which dawned on Germany in the last century, and to which our own culture owes so great a debt. Dialogue, certainly, that wonderful literary form, which from Plato to Lucian, and from Lucian to Giordano Bruno, and from Bruno to that grand old pagan, in whom Carlyle took such delight, the creative critics of the world have always employed, can never lose for the thinker its attraction as a mode of expression. By its means he can both reveal and conceal himself, and give form to every fancy, and reality to every mood. By its means he can exhibit the object from each point of view, and show it to us in the round, as a sculptor shows us things, gaining in this manner all the richness and reality of effect that comes from those side issues that are suddenly suggested by the central idea in its progress, and really illumine the idea more completely, or from those felicitous afterthoughts that give a fuller completeness to the central scheme, and yet convey something of the delicate charm of chance. Ernest. By its means, too, he can invent an imaginary antagonist, and convert him when he chooses by some absurdly sophistical argument. Gilbert. Ah, it is so easy to convert others. It is so difficult to convert oneself. To arrive at what one really believes, one must speak through lips different from one's own. To know the truth, one must imagine myriads of falsehoods. For what is truth? In matters of religion, it is simply the opinion that has survived. In matters of science, it is the ultimate sensation. In matters of art, it is one's last mood. And you see now, Ernest, that the critic has at his disposal as many objective forms of expression as the artist has. Ruskin put his criticism into imaginative prose, and is superb in his changes and contradictions. And Browning put his into blank verse, and made painter and poet yield us their secret. And M. Renan uses dialogue, and Mr. Pater fiction, and Rossetti translated into sonnet music the color of Giorgione and the design of Ingres, and his own design and color also, feeling with the instinct of one who had many modes of utterance that the ultimate art is literature, and the finest and fullest medium that of words. Ernest. Well, now that you have settled that the critic has at his disposal all objective forms, I wish you would tell me what are the qualities that should characterize the true critic. Gilbert. What would you say they were? Ernest. Well, I should say that a critic should above all things be fair. Gilbert. Ah, not fair. A critic cannot be fair in the ordinary sense of the word. It is only about things that do not interest one that one can give a really unbiased opinion, which is no doubt the reason why an unbiased opinion is always absolutely valueless. The man who sees both sides of a question is a man who sees absolutely nothing at all. Art is a passion, and in matters of art, thought is inevitably colored by emotion, and so is fluid rather than fixed, and depending upon the fine moods and exquisite moments, cannot be narrowed into the rigidity of a scientific formula or a theological dogma. It is to the soul that art speaks, and the soul may be made the prisoner of the mind as well as of the body. One should, of course, have no prejudices, but as a great Frenchman remarked 100 years ago, it is one's business in such matters to have preferences, and when one has preferences, one ceases to be fair. It is only an auctioneer who can equally and impartially admire all schools of art. No, fairness is not one of the qualities of the true critic. It is not even a condition of criticism. Each form of art with which we come in contact dominates us for the moment to the exclusion of every other form. We must surrender ourselves absolutely to the work in question, whatever it may be, if we wish to gain its secret. For the time we must think of nothing else, can think of nothing else indeed. Ernest. The true critic will be rational at any rate, will he not? Gilbert. Rational? There are two ways of disliking art, Ernest. One is to dislike it, the other to like it rationally. For art, as Plato saw, and not without regret, creates in listener and spectator a form of divine madness. It does not spring from inspiration, but it makes others inspired. Reason is not the faculty to which it appeals. If one loves art at all, one must love it beyond all other things in the world, and against such love the reason, if one listened to it, would cry out. There is nothing sane about the worship of beauty. It is too splendid to be sane. Those of whose lives it forms the dominant note will always seem to the world to be pure visionaries. Ernest. Well, at least the critic will be sincere. Gilbert. A little sincerity is a dangerous thing, and a great deal of it is absolutely fatal. The true critic will indeed always be sincere in his devotion to the principle of beauty, but he will seek for beauty in every age and in each school, and will never suffer himself to be limited to any settled custom of thought, or stereotyped mode of looking at things. He will realize himself in many forms, and by 1,000 different ways, and will never be curious of new sensations and fresh points of view. Through constant change, and through constant change alone, he will find his true unity. He will not consent to be the slave of his own opinions. For what is mind but motion in the intellectual sphere? The essence of thought, as the essence of life, is growth. You must not be frightened by words, Ernest. What people call insincerity is simply a method by which we can multiply our personalities. Ernest. I am afraid I have not been fortunate in my suggestions. Gilbert. Of the 3 qualifications you mentioned, 2, sincerity and fairness, were, if not actually moral, at least on the borderland of morals, and the first condition of criticism is that the critic should be able to recognize that the sphere of art and the sphere of ethics are absolutely distinct and separate. When they are confused, chaos has come again. They are too often confused in England now, and though our modern Puritans cannot destroy a beautiful thing, Yet by means of their extraordinary prurience, they can almost taint beauty for a moment. It is chiefly, I regret to say, through journalism that such people find expression. I regret it because there is much to be said in favor of modern journalism. By giving us the opinions of the uneducated, it keeps us in touch with the ignorance of the community. By carefully chronicling the current events of contemporary life, it shows us of what very little importance such events really are. By invariably discussing the unnecessary, it makes us understand what things are requisite for culture, and what are not. But it should not allow poor Tartuffe to write articles upon modern art. When it does this, it stultifies itself. And yet Tartuffe's articles and Chadban's notes do this good at least. They serve to show how extremely limited is the area over which ethics and ethical considerations can claim to exercise influence. Science is out of the reach of morals, for her eyes are fixed upon eternal truths. Art is out of the reach of morals, for her eyes are fixed upon things beautiful and immortal and ever-changing. To morals belong the lower and less intellectual spheres. However, let these mouthing Puritans pass. They have their comic side. Who can help laughing when an ordinary journalist seriously proposes to limit the subject matter at the disposal of the artist? Some limitation might well, and will soon, I hope, be placed upon some of our newspapers and newspaper writers, for they give us the bald, sordid, disgusting facts of life. They chronicle, with degrading avidity, the sins of the second rate, and with the conscientiousness of the illiterate, gives us accurate and prosaic details of the doings of people of absolutely no interest whatsoever. But the artist, who accepts the facts of life and yet transforms them into shapes of beauty, and makes them vehicles of pity or of awe, and shows their color element and their wonder and their true ethical import also, and builds out of them a world more real than reality itself, and of loftier and more noble import, who shall set limits to him? Not the apostles of that new journalism, which is but the old vulgarity writ large. Not the apostles of that new Puritanism, which is but the wine of the hypocrite, and is both writ and spoken badly. The mere suggestion is ridiculous. Let us leave these wicked people, and proceed to the discussion of the artistic qualifications necessary for the true critic. Ernest. And what are they? Tell me yourself. Gilbert. Temperament is the primary requisite for the critic. A temperament exquisitely susceptible to beauty, and to the various impressions that beauty gives us. Under what conditions, and by what means, this temperament is engendered in race or individual, we will not discuss at present. It is sufficient to note that it exists, and that there is in us a beauty sense, separate from the other senses and above them, separate from the reason and of nobler import, separate from the soul and of equal value, a sense that leads some to create, and others, the finer spirits, as I think, to contemplate merely. But to be purified and made perfect, this sense requires some form of exquisite environment. Without this it starves, or is dulled. You remember that lovely passage in which Plato describes how a young Greek should be educated, and with what insistence he dwells upon the importance of surroundings, telling us how the lad is to be brought up in the midst of fair sights and sounds, so that the beauty of material things may prepare his soul for the reception of the beauty that is spiritual. Insensibly, and without knowing the reason why, he is to develop that real love of beauty, which, as Plato is never weary of reminding us, is the true aim of education. By slow degrees there is to be engendered in him such a temperament as will lead him naturally and simply to choose the good in preference to the bad, and rejecting what is vulgar and discordant, to follow by fine instinctive taste all that possesses grace and charm and loveliness. Ultimately, in its due course, this taste is to become critical and self-conscious. But at first it is to exist purely as a cultivated instinct, and he who has received this true culture of the inner man will, with a clear and certain vision, perceive the omissions and faults in art or nature, and with a taste that cannot err, while he praises and finds his pleasure in what is good, and receives it into his soul, and so becomes good and noble. He will rightly blame and hate the bad, now in the days of his youth, even before he is able to know the reason why. And so, when later on the critical and self-conscious spirit develops in him, he will recognize and salute it as a friend with whom his education has made him long familiar. I need hardly say, Ernest, how far we in England have fallen short of this ideal, and I can imagine the smile that would illuminate the glossy face of the Philistine if one ventured to suggest to him that the true aim of education was the love of beauty, and that the methods by which education should work were the development of temperament, the cultivation of taste, and the creation of the critical spirit. Yet, even for us, there is left some loveliness of environment, and the dullness of tutors and professors matters very little when one can loiter in the grey cloisters of Magdalen and listen to some flute-like voice singing in Wainfleet's chapel, or lie in the green meadow among the strange, snake-spotted fritillaries, or watch the sunburnt noon smite to a finer gold the tower's gilded vanes, or wander up the Christ Church staircase beneath a vaulted ceiling's shadowy fans, or pass through the sculptured gateway of Laud's building in the College of St. John. Nor is it merely at Oxford or Cambridge that the sense of beauty can be formed and trained and perfected. All over England there is a renaissance of the decorative arts. Ugliness has had its day. Even in the houses of the rich there is taste, and the houses of those who are not rich have been made gracious and comely and sweet to live in. Caliban, poor noisy Caliban, thinks that when he has ceased to make mows at a thing, the thing ceases to exist. But if he mocks no longer, it is because he has been met with mockery, swifter and keener than his own, and for a moment has been bitterly schooled into that silence which should seal forever his uncouth, distorted lips. What has been done up to now has been chiefly in the clearing of the way. It is always more difficult to destroy than it is to create. And when what one has to destroy is vulgarity and stupidity, the task of destruction needs not merely courage, but also contempt. Yet it seems to me to have been in a measure done. We have got rid of what was bad. We have now to make what is beautiful. And though the mission of the aesthetic movement is to lure people to contemplate, not to lead them to create, yet as the creative instinct is strong in the Celt, and it is the Celt who leads in art, there is no reason why in future years this strange renaissance should not become almost as mighty in its way as was that new birth of art that woke many centuries ago in the cities of Italy. Certainly, for the cultivation of temperament, we must turn to the decorative arts, to the arts that touch us, not to the arts that teach us. Modern pictures are, no doubt, delightful to look at least some of them are, but they are quite impossible to live with. They are too clever, too assertive, too intellectual. Their meaning is too obvious, and their method too clearly defined. One exhausts what they have to say in a very short time, and then they become as tedious as one's relations. I am very fond of the work of many of the impressionist painters of Paris and London. Subtlety and distinction have not yet left the school. Some of their arrangements and harmonies serve to remind one of the unapproachable beauty of Gaudier's immortal symphony en blanc majeur, that flawless masterpiece of color and music which may have suggested the type as well as the titles of many of their best pictures. For a class that welcomes the incompetent with sympathetic eagerness, and that confuses the bizarre with the beautiful and vulgarity with truth, they are extremely accomplished. They can do etchings that have the brilliancy of epigrams, pastels that are as fascinating as paradoxes, and as for their portraits, whatever the commonplace may say against them, no one can deny that they possess that unique and wonderful charm which belongs to works of pure fiction. But even the Impressionists, earnest and industrious as they are, will not do. I like them. Their white keynote with its variations in lilac was an era in color. Though the moment does not make the man, the moment certainly makes the impressionist, and for the moment in art, and for the moment's monument, as Rossetti phrased it, what may not be said? They are suggestive also. If they have not opened the eyes of the blind, they have at least given great encouragement to the short-sighted. And while their leaders may have all the inexperience of old age, their young men are far too wise to be ever sensible. Yet they will insist on treating painting as if it were a mode of autobiography, invented for the use of the illiterate, and are always prating to us on their coarse, gritty canvases of their unnecessary selves and their unnecessary opinions, and spoiling by a vulgar overemphasis that fine contempt of nature, which is the best and only modest thing about them. One tires, at the end, of the work of individuals whose individuality is always noisy and generally uninteresting. There is far more to be said in favor of that newer school at Paris, the archaicists, as they call themselves, who, refusing to leave the artist entirely at the mercy of the weather, do not find the ideal of art in mere atmospheric effect, but seek rather for the imaginative beauty of design and the loveliness of fair color, and rejecting the tedious realism of those who merely paint what they see, try to see something worth seeing, and to see it not merely with actual and physical vision, but with that nobler vision of the soul, which is as far wider in spiritual scope as it is far more splendid in artistic purpose. They, at any rate, work under those decorative conditions that each art requires for its perfection, and have sufficient aesthetic instinct to regret those sordid and stupid limitations of absolute modernity of form which have proved the ruin of so many of the Impressionists. Still, the art that is frankly decorative is the art to live with. It is, of all our visible arts, the one art that creates in us both mood and temperament. Mere color, unspoiled by meaning and unallied with definite form, can speak to the soul in 1,000 different ways. The harmony that resides in the delicate proportions of lines and masses becomes mirrored in the mind. The repetitions of pattern give us rest. The marvels of design stir the imagination. In the mere loveliness of the materials employed, there are latent elements of culture. Nor is this all. By its deliberate rejection of nature as the ideal of beauty, as well as of the imitative method of the ordinary painter, decorative art not merely prepares the soul for the perception of true imaginative work, but develops in it that sense of form which is the basis of creative, no less than of critical achievement. For the real artist is he who proceeds not from feeling to form, but from form to thought and passion. He does not first conceive an idea and then say to himself, I will put my idea into a complex meter of 14 lines. But, realizing the beauty of the sonnet scheme, he conceives certain modes of music and methods of rhyme, and the mere form suggests what is to fill it and make it intellectually and emotionally complete. From time to time the world cries out against some charming artistic poet, because, to use its hackneyed and silly phrase, he has nothing to say. But if he had something to say, he would probably say it, and the result would be tedious. It is just because he has no new message that he can do beautiful work. He gains his inspiration from form, and from form purely as an artist should. A real passion would ruin him. Whatever actually occurs is spoiled for art. All bad poetry springs from genuine feeling. To be natural is to be obvious, and to be obvious is to be inartistic. Ernest: I wonder, do you really believe what you say? Gilbert: Why should you wonder? It is not merely in art that the body is the soul. In every sphere of life, form is the beginning of things. The rhythmic harmonious gestures of dancing convey, Plato tells us, both rhythm and harmony into the mind. Forms are the food of faith, cried Newman in one of those great moments of sincerity that make us admire and know the man. He was right, though he may not have known how terribly right he was. The creeds are believed not because they are rational, but because they are repeated. Yes, form is everything. It is the secret of life. Find expression for a sorrow, and it will become dear to you. Find expression for a joy, and you intensify its ecstasy. Do you wish to love? Use love's litany, and the words will create the yearning from which the world fancies that they spring. Have you a grief that corrodes your heart? Steep yourself in the language of grief. Learn its utterance from Prince Hamlet and Queen Constance, and you will find that mere expression is a mode of consolation, and that form, which is the birth of passion, is also the death of pain. And so, to return to the sphere of art, it is form that creates not merely the critical temperament, but also the aesthetic instinct, that unerring instinct that reveals to one all things under their conditions of beauty. Start with a worship of form, and there is no secret in art that will not be revealed to you. And remember that in criticism, as in creation, temperament is everything, and that it is not by the time of their production, but by the temperaments to which they appeal, that the schools of art should be historically grouped. Ernest. Your theory of education is delightful. But what influence will your critic, brought up in these exquisite surroundings, possess? Do you really think that any artist is ever affected by criticism? Gilbert. The influence of the critic will be the mere fact of his own existence. He will represent the flawless type. In him the culture of the century will see itself realized. You must not ask of him to have any aim other than the perfecting of himself. The demand of the intellect, as has been well said, is simply to feel itself alive. The critic may, indeed, desire to exercise influence, but, if so, he will concern himself not with the individual, but with the age, which he will seek to wake into consciousness, and to make responsive, creating in it new desires and appetites, and lending it his larger vision and his nobler moods. The actual art of today will occupy him less than the art of tomorrow, far less than the art of yesterday. And as for this or that person at present toiling away, what do the industrious matter? They do their best, no doubt, and consequently we get the worst from them. It is always with the best intentions that the worst work is done. And besides, my dear Ernest, when a man reaches the age of 40, or becomes a Royal Academician, or is elected a member of the Athenaeum Club, or is recognized as a popular novelist, whose books are in great demand at suburban railway stations, one may have the amusement of exposing him, but one cannot have the pleasure of reforming him. And this is, I dare say, very fortunate for him, for I have no doubt that reformation is a much more painful process than punishment, is indeed punishment in its most aggravated and moral form, a fact which accounts for our entire failure as a community to reclaim that interesting phenomenon who is called the confirmed criminal. Ernest. But may it not be that the poet is the judge of poetry, and the painter of painting? Each art must appeal primarily to the artist who works in it. His judgment will surely be the most valuable. Gilbert. The appeal of all art is simply to the artistic temperament. Art does not address herself to the specialist. Her claim is that she is universal, and that in all her manifestations she is one. Indeed, so far from its being true that the artist is the best judge of art, a really great artist can never judge of other people's work at all, and can hardly, in fact, judge of his own. That very concentration of vision that makes a man an artist limits by its sheer intensity his faculty of fine appreciation. The energy of creation hurries him blindly on to his own goal. The wheels of his chariot raise the dust as a cloud around him. The gods are hidden from each other. They can recognize their worshippers. That is all. Ernest. You say that a great artist cannot recognize the beauty of work different from his own. Gilbert. It is impossible for him to do so. Wordsworth saw in Endymion merely a pretty piece of paganism, and Shelley, with his dislike of actuality, was deaf to Wordsworth's message, being repelled by its form. And Byron, that great, passionate, human, incomplete creature, could appreciate neither the poet of the cloud nor the poet of the lake, and the wonder of Keats was hidden from him. The realism of Euripides was hateful to Sophocles. Those droppings of warm tears had no music for him. Milton, with his sense of the grand style, could not understand the method of Shakespeare any more than could Sir Joshua the method of Gainsborough. Bad artists always admire each other's work. They call it being large-minded and free from prejudice. But a truly great artist cannot conceive of life being shown or beauty fashioned under any condition other than those that he has selected. Creation employs all its critical faculty within its own sphere. It may not use it in the sphere that belongs to others. It is exactly because a man cannot do a thing that he is the proper judge of it. Ernest. Do you really mean that? Gilbert. Yes, for creation limits, while contemplation widens the vision. Ernest. But what about technique? Surely each art has its separate technique. Gilbert. Certainly. Each art has its grammar and its materials. There is no mystery about either, and the incompetent can always be correct. But while the laws upon which art rests may be fixed and certain, to find their true realization, they must be touched by the imagination into such beauty that they will seem an exception, each one of them. Technique is really personality. That is the reason why the artist cannot teach it, why the pupil cannot learn it, and why the aesthetic critic cannot understand it. To the great poet, there is only one method of music, his own. To the great painter, there is only one manner of painting, that which he himself employs. The aesthetic critic, and the aesthetic critic alone, can appreciate all forms and modes. It is to him that art makes her appeal. Ernest. Well, I think I have put all my questions to you. And now I must admit... Gilbert. Ah, don't say that you agree with me. When people agree with me, I always feel that I must be wrong. Ernest. In that case, I certainly won't tell you whether I agree with you or not. But I will put another question. You have explained to me that criticism is a creative art. What future has it? Gilbert. It is to criticism that the future belongs. The subject matter at the disposal of creation becomes every day more limited in extent and variety. Providence and Mr. Walter Besant have exhausted the obvious. If creation is to last at all, it can only do so on the condition of becoming far more critical than it is at present. The old roads and dusty highways have been traversed too often. Their charm has been worn away by plodding feet, and they have lost that element of novelty or surprise which is so essential for romance. He who would stir us now by fiction must either give us an entirely new background or reveal to us the soul of man in its innermost workings. The first is for the moment being done for us by Mr. Rudyard Kipling. As one turns over the pages of his Plain Tales from the Hills, one feels as if one were seated under a palm tree, reading life by superb flashes of vulgarity. The bright colors of the bazaars dazzle one's eyes. The jaded, second-rate Anglo-Indians are in exquisite incongruity with their surroundings. The mere lack of style in the storyteller gives an odd journalistic realism to what he tells us. From the point of view of literature, Mr. Kipling is a genius who drops his aspirates. From the point of view of life, he is a reporter who knows vulgarity better than anyone has ever known it. Dickens knew its clothes and its comedy. Mr. Kipling knows its essence and its seriousness. He is our first authority on the second rate, and has seen marvelous things through keyholes, and his backgrounds are real works of art. As for the second condition, we have had Browning, and Meredith is with us. But there is still much to be done in the sphere of introspection. People sometimes say that fiction is getting too morbid. As far as psychology is concerned, it has never been morbid enough. We have merely touched the surface of the soul, that is all. In one single ivory cell of the brain there are stored away things more marvelous and more terrible than even they have dreamed of, who, like the author of The Red and the Black, have sought to track the soul in its most secret places, and to make life confess its dearest sins. Still, there is a limit even to the number of untried backgrounds, and it is possible that a further development of the habit of introspection may prove fatal to that creative faculty to which it seeks to supply fresh material. I myself am inclined to think that creation is doomed. It springs from too primitive, too natural an impulse. However this may be, it is certain that the subject matter at the disposal of creation is always diminishing, while the subject matter of criticism increases daily. There are always new attitudes for the mind, and new points of view. The duty of imposing form upon chaos does not grow less as the world advances. There was never a time when criticism was more needed than it is now. It is only by its means that humanity can become conscious of the point at which it has arrived. Hours ago, Ernest, you asked me the use of criticism. You might just as well have asked me the use of thought. It is criticism, as Arnold points out, that creates the intellectual atmosphere of the age. It is criticism, as I hope to point out myself some day, that makes the mind a fine instrument. We, in our educational system, have burdened the memory with a load of unconnected facts, and laboriously striven to impart our laboriously acquired knowledge. We teach people how to remember. We never teach them how to grow. It has never occurred to us to try and develop in the mind a more subtle quality of apprehension and discernment. The Greeks did this, and when we come in contact with the Greek critical intellect, we cannot but be conscious that, while our subject matter is in every respect larger and more varied than theirs is the only method by which this subject matter can be interpreted. England has done one thing. It has invented and established public opinion, which is an attempt to organize the ignorance of the community and to elevate it to the dignity of physical force. But wisdom has always been hidden from it. Considered as an instrument of thought, the English mind is coarse and undeveloped. The only thing that can purify it is the growth of the critical instinct. It is criticism, again, that by concentration makes culture possible. It takes the cumbersome mass of creative work and distills it into a finer essence. Who that desires to retain any sense of form could struggle through the monstrous multitudinous books that the world has produced, books in which thought stammers or ignorance brawls? The thread that is to guide us across the wearisome labyrinths is in the hands of criticism. Nay more, where there is no record, and history is either lost or was never written, criticism can recreate the past for us from the very smallest fragment of language or art, just as surely as the man of science can from some tiny bone or the mere impress of a foot upon a rock recreate for us the winged dragon or Titan lizard that once made the earth shake beneath its tread, can call Behemoth out of his cave and make Leviathan swim once more across the startled sea. Prehistoric history belongs to the philological and archaeological critic. It is to him that the origins of things are revealed. The self-conscious deposits of an age are nearly always misleading. Through philological criticism alone, we know more of the centuries of which no actual record has been preserved than we do of the centuries that have left us their scrolls. It can do for us what can be done neither by physics nor metaphysics. It can give us the exact science of mind in the process of becoming. It can do for us what history cannot do. It can tell us what man thought before he learned how to write. You have asked me about the influence of criticism. I think I have answered that question already, but there is this also to be said. It is criticism that makes us cosmopolitan. The Manchester School tried to make men realize the brotherhood of humanity by pointing out the commercial advantages of peace. It sought to degrade the wonderful world into the common marketplace for the buyer and the seller. It addressed itself to the lowest instincts, and it failed. War followed upon war, and the tradesman's creed did not prevent France and Germany from clashing together in blood-stained battle. There are others of our own day who seek to appeal to mere emotional sympathies, or to the shallow dogmas of some vague system of abstract ethics. They have their peace societies, so dear to the sentimentalists, and their proposals for unarmed international arbitration, so popular among those who have never read history. But mere emotional sympathy will not do. It is too variable and too closely connected with the passions, and a board of arbitrators, who for the general welfare of the race are to be deprived of their power of putting their decisions into execution, will not be of much avail. There is only one thing worse than injustice, and that is justice without her sword in her hand. When right is not might, it is evil. No, the emotions will not make us cosmopolitan any more than the greed for gain could do so. It is only by the cultivation of the habit of intellectual criticism that we shall be able to rise superior to race prejudices. Goethe, you will not misunderstand what I say, was a German of the Germans. He loved his country, no man more so. Its people were dear to him, and he led them. Yet when the iron hoof of Napoleon trampled upon vineyard and cornfield, his lips were silent. How can one write songs of hatred without hating, he said to Eckermann. And how could I, to whom culture and barbarism are alone of importance, hate a nation which is among the most cultivated of the earth, and to which I owe so great a part of my own cultivation? This note, sounded in the modern world by Goethe first, will become, I think, the starting point for the cosmopolitanism of the future. Criticism will annihilate race prejudices by insisting upon the unity of the human mind in the variety of its forms. If we are tempted to make war upon another nation, we shall remember that we are seeking to destroy an element of our own culture, and possibly its most important element. As long as war is regarded as wicked, it will always have its fascination. When it is looked upon as vulgar, it will cease to be popular. The change will of course be slow, and people will not be conscious of it. They will not say, "We will not war against France because her prose is perfect." But because the prose of France is perfect, they will not hate the land. Intellectual criticism will bind Europe together in bonds far closer than those that can be forged by shopman or sentimentalist. It will give us the peace that springs from understanding. Nor is this all. It is criticism that, recognizing no position as final, and refusing to bind itself by the shallow shibboleths of any sect or school, creates that serene philosophic temper which loves truth for its own sake, and loves it not the less because it knows it to be unattainable. How little we have of this temper in England, and how much we need it. The English mind is always in a rage. The intellect of the race is wasted in the sordid and stupid quarrels of second-rate politicians or third-rate theologians. It was reserved for a man of science to show us the supreme example of that sweet reasonableness of which Arnold spoke so wisely, and alas, to so little effect. The author of The Origin of Species had at any rate the philosophic temper. If one contemplates the ordinary pulpits and platforms of England, one can but feel the contempt of Julian, of the indifference of Montaigne. We are dominated by the fanatic, whose worst vice is his sincerity. Anything approaching to the free play of the mind is practically unknown amongst us. People cry out against the sinner, yet it is not the sinful but the stupid who are our shame. There is no sin except stupidity. Ernest. Ah, what an antinomian you are! Gilbert. The artistic critic, like the mystic, is an antinomian always. To be good, according to the vulgar standard of goodness, is obviously quite easy. It merely requires a certain amount of sordid terror, a certain lack of imaginative thought, and a certain low passion for middle-class respectability. Aesthetics are higher than ethics. They belong to a more spiritual sphere. To discern the beauty of a thing is the finest point to which we can arrive. Even a color sense is more important in the development of the individual than a sense of right and wrong. Aesthetics, in fact, are to ethics in the sphere of conscious civilization what in the sphere of the external world sexual is to natural selection. Ethics, like natural selection, makes existence possible. Aesthetics, like sexual selection, make life lovely and wonderful, fill it with new forms, and give it progress and variety and change. And when we reach the true culture that is our aim, we attain to that perfection of which the saints have dreamed, the perfection of those to whom sin is impossible, not because they make the renunciations of the ascetic, but because they can do everything they wish without hurt to the soul, and can wish for nothing that can do the soul harm, the soul being an entity so divine that it is able to transform into elements of a richer experience, or a finer susceptibility, or a newer mode of thought, acts or passions that with the common would be commonplace, or with the uneducated ignoble, or with the shameful vile. Is this dangerous? Yes, it is dangerous. All ideas, as I told you, are so. But the night wearies, and the light flickers in the lamp. One more thing I cannot help saying to you. You have spoken against criticism as being a sterile thing. The 19th century is a turning point in history simply on account of the work of two men, Darwin and Renan, the one the critic of the book of nature, the other the critic of the books of God. Not to recognize this is to miss the meaning of one of the most important eras in the progress of the world. Creation is always behind the age. It is criticism that leads us. The critical spirit and the world spirit are one. Ernest. And he who is in possession of this spirit, or whom this spirit possesses, will, I suppose, do nothing? Gilbert. Like the Persephone of whom Landor tells us, the sweet pensive Persephone around whose white feet the asphodel and amaranth are blooming, he will sit contented in that deep, motionless quiet which mortals pity and which the gods enjoy. He will look out upon the world and know its secret. By contact with divine things, he will become divine. His will be the perfect life, and his only. Ernest. You have told me many strange things tonight, Gilbert. You have told me that it is more difficult to talk about a thing than to do it, and that to do nothing at all is the most difficult thing in the world. You have told me that all art is immoral, and all thought is dangerous, that criticism is more creative than creation, and that the highest criticism is that which reveals in the work of art what the artist had not put there, that it is exactly because a man cannot do a thing that he is the proper judge of it, and that the true critic is unfair, insincere, and not rational. My friend, you are a dreamer. Gilbert. Yes, I am a dreamer, for a dreamer is one who can only find his way by moonlight, and his punishment is that he sees the dawn before the rest of the world. Ernest. His punishment? Gilbert. And his reward. But see, it is dawn already. Draw back the curtains and open the windows wide. How cool the morning air is. Piccadilly lies at our feet like a long riband of silver. A faint purple mist hangs over the park, and the shadows of the white houses are purple. It is too late to sleep. Let us go down to Covent Garden and look at the roses. Come, I am tired of thought. This is the end of The Critic as Artist by Oscar Wilde. Thank you for listening.